My name is Johann. I'm researcher at the Institute of Technology Assessment of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, and I'm the coordinator of one of the organizing projects of the Surprise project, and I coordinated also the PRISMS project. Let me very briefly give you some information about the background of our projects, mainly or for those who did not join in the first session. So PRISMS and Surprise are two FP7 security research projects with several objectives. So one central objective is to investigate into the relation between privacy, security, surveillance from a citizen's perspective, and this was more or less shown or presented at the first part of our double session. And another very important objective of our project was to develop methods or to develop ideas how this knowledge gained from citizen participation could be integrated into better, more rational decision-making on security technology, security measures. And here, as I said, we had different approaches in PRISMS. There was a survey, European-wide survey, and we had citizen summits, which are full-day events with 200 participants and with alternating phases of group discussions, voting, and also developing of recommendations from the citizens to the politicians. But anyway, I will not steal much more of your time. Just when we are then going into the details, discussing the decision support possibilities from our results, I think we should also think or keep in mind that it's something limited, so it's not, it's a contribution to democratic participation, but it's not democratic decision making. And it's a contribution to implementing human values, European values into technologies, but it cannot replace a proper check of fundamental rights compliance. On the other hand, it has very, very big advantages. So from our experiences, the discussions, debates among citizens are much more rational and less prone to populism than we can see from discussions in the media or from decisions by politicians in the last weeks as a reaction to the Paris attacks. And it's also a kind of, I think it's opening, so it's a kind of more evidence-based decision-making, as citizens have different perceptions of what are the most important threats. They are demanding alternative measures, and they are demanding long-term decisions, long-term, let's say, measures taking into account the root causes. But now, let me just move on to the
speakers. Thank you. So, thank you, Johann, for the introduction. I'm Marc van Lieshout. I'll be moderating this session. And basically, to be very honest, I'm very happy that there are more of you than there are in the panel, because this is the last session of a very interesting few days we've had, with a lot of interesting subjects. And now, but we've somehow saved the most complicated and the most complex issue which we should deal with for the very last. So you're happily invited to join a kind of a discussion, and we will really try to make it interactive. What we have is three eloquent speakers who all are able within 10 minutes to make their point, don't you? Well, that's great. That looks fine. And we have a kind of an interactive session in which we want to involve you in this process of participatory decision making. So let's start. Our first speaker will be Lilian Mitrou. You changed the order? No, you're the lady. Okay. Yeah, you can do it? Oh, that's great. Lilian Mitrou is working at the university, the Aegean University in Greece. Aegean University. No. Aegean University, which still seems to cover quite a lot of ground over there. And you have been active within the PACT project as well. So please feel free.
I have to clarify. First, I am a lawyer. Second, I am not eloquent. Third, I have prepared another presentation, but because there was a misunderstanding concerning what I was expected to present, but I have made a lot of changes. That's why I'll skip a lot of slides, and I'll try to meet the requirements and the expectations of Marc by setting questions, not by answering questions. It's a way to escape the situation. And let me begin with the fact that we have the findings of PACT Survey, not only of PRISM of surprise, have underlined in a way a unique approach concerning CCTV systems used in Greece. And it's interesting to reflect and discuss on the impact of security challenges and of institutional and last but not least economical context of the perception of privacy in public. And I was interested also to discuss how we could involve the Greek public, a specific public, not in a pilot phase, a very specific public with high concerns, privacy concerns, and embedded distrust, mistrust towards state surveillance in the discussion about security and challenge. I have to clarify also that video surveillance in public or publicly accessible places is not anymore exceptional or occasional phenomenon in Greece. Over the past 10 years especially, the use of CCTV cameras is no more limited to monitoring and managing traffic flows or bugs, but it has become increasingly common in many places. And video surveillance in Greece is regarded as a kind of panacea to promptly deal with security concerns, and more as a ad hoc safety and security tool for protection and crime prevention, and less as a form of surveillance. The routinization of CCTV uses influences, in my opinion, trait of argumentation as well as the perception of proportionality, both by citizens and by institutions, courts, and decision makers and politicians. I'll skip this slide, but just to point out that the first massive use of CCTV systems in public places in Greece was related to the security challenges of Athens Olympic Games, because it was the first Olympic Games after 9/11, and it was really very important to organize secure games. And later on, the government has tried to extend the CCTV use for the revelation, for many purposes, and not only for the primary purpose, which was the traffic management. And in a way to achieve it, they have also abolished in 2008 the competence of the DPA to supervise data processing via CCTV systems by law enforcement authorities for the purposes of state security. This is no more the case because the law has changed, and there is now a more specific legal ground for the use of CCTV in public spaces based on proportionality, but unfortunately it's still no enforced, because we have to issue a presidential decree, which is still missing. Just to clarify also that privacy in public is accepted by jurisprudence, by legal theories Greece as a right, and also security is accepted as a restriction, an acceptable restriction to fundamental rights, and by the public is also presented as a resultant of the demand for the state to undertake positive obligations and actions for the protection of rights such as right to life, ownership, personality, etc. However, a right to security does not have a distinct self-existence ground in the Greek constitution. Let's refer to some statistics. Already in 2007, only 1 in 3 respondents said that they feel CCTV systems intrude more than they protect. Greeks were indeed in favor of CCTV systems use in banks, football stadiums, public services, streets in town centers, shops, schools, universities, parks and squares, and at the end, public transport. According to the travel survey conducted in the context of the PACT project, respondents were asked to consider scenarios relating to the presence of CCTV cameras in metro and public transport stations. In contrast to all other countries, respondents from Greece prefer unarmed police personnel and reject the idea of private personnel. And contrary to the preferences in most EU 27 countries, respondents in Greece indicate a strong disinclination for storage of CCTV data, preferring, however, real-time monitoring. Citizens, why? You have Michael has referred as a kind of Greek paradox during a conference in Vienna. Why? Citizens are influenced by a multitude of factors. Privacy and security may be experienced differently in different political and socio-cultural contexts. And I must say that in Greece there is a negative surveillance culture. There is a popular sensitivity and vigilance against any state monitoring and filing. And this is to explain, due among other parameters, to experiences from repressive state surveillance in the recent history of Greece, a history of civil conflicts, wars, and dictatorships. The main problem seems to be that Greeks are not opposed to watching, but they are opposed to filing of personal data. Another factor that we have to point out is that the mistrust towards the state and the mistrust towards even legitimate institutional surveillance. And this is important also to discuss the role of historical and social context in determining societal impact as well as privacy impact. On the other side, Greeks are generally unconcerned with non-state private video surveillance and data collection. And this is also a kind of privacy paradox, because I think we can explain it because disregarding of private video surveillance fits well into a society where most things are marketable. And it's a kind of trade-off, but in private places and by private entities. And we should also not ignore the driving force of technology, the availability of cheap systems, CCTV systems, and the extensive use of them. Change slightly but steadily the social perception of what is acceptable or excessive in relation to security measures, and influences in this way the regulatory content and the interpretation of core principles such as the principle of proportionality. And of course, people ignore the so-called function or mission creep. They ignore that information gained through privately deployed CCTV systems are increasingly placed at the disposal of the state. And they ignore, they are not aware, even they can see it in every report of the television also, that police has accessed some information via the use of private CCTV systems, but they are not aware of this fact of distributed surveillance. Let me stress your attention also to the influences, to the impacts of the economic financial crisis in Greece and the relations to CCTV systems and the relation to the concept, to the perception of security. Public fears about property and violent crime appear to have risen dramatically, especially in this phase of economic crisis. Concerns expressed about the relationship between economic crisis and law-breaking political violence are at the very center of the public discussion. And I think that the growing tolerance and acceptance of CCTV mirror risk perception and fears and the sense that somebody has to look after you. And this is also, CCTV systems are perceived also as a symbol of safety. And at this point, let me stress your attention also to the fact that in Greece we have the same word for safety and security. We are using the same word, which is, its origin is asphalia, that means without fault. And this is also an expectation that everything should function without fault, in a secure and safe way. And some concluding thoughts. CCTV is indeed a symbol in Greece of surveillance and safety. But I think that the results of many surveys have proved it. Public perceptions of security and privacy can be also politically or socially emotive, and that's mixed up in dominant political discourses. At least in Greece, it's the case. And there are plenty of cultural and societal characteristics that should determine the level of privacy concerns and security needs and demands, the way and level of awareness and the way and level of raising awareness, the way and level of involvement in public debate and decision making. But let me ask a question, because this is my way to escape the requirements of Marc. What is the public? There is in the program, there is that we have to discuss on the real involvement of the public. What is the public? Is public active citizens? And which is the definition of stakeholders concerning the public? Because we have public, we have affected communities, we have affected persons, and especially in societies in crisis, it's very difficult to find out, to define the public which has to be involved, where, when, and where we have contrasts, contradictions, and conflicts. And what about the online public? Do we mean with public also online communities? Do we mean involve also public consultation as a way to involve the public? Would be a real involvement. We don't know exactly who is participating. And I had this experience because I was involved in public consultation as a citizen, as decision maker, and as I should also assess the decision making. And I'm not very sure who is participating to this kind of online consultation. And on the other, at the same time, impacts of surveillance differ widely. Different social groups identify and value privacy and security in different ways. I have heard about your results, but I have in mind some specific areas at the very center of Athens, and I can assure you that they are experiencing security needs and privacy concerns in a very different way. And there are massive geographical and social variations in the use and experience of surveillance, and that means also in the perception and of security and of privacy. And the needs of security and the needs of privacy are sometimes, or very often, not equally distributed. Then we have some challenges, and I'm coming to the end.
You have to, because you have almost 1 minute left. So.
How we can organize public consultation in a way to take these cultural and societal characteristics into account. How we can organize the real involvement of which exactly public, if often in the same neighborhood, we do have very contradictory needs and approaches. How to organize the real involvement of the public in a way to address the lack of trust. Because the lack of trust is a prerequisite for consultation, but in order to get accurate answers. But if there is mistrust there, how you can organize the real involvement of a public which mistrust the state. And the last challenge, how to combine privacy impact assessment and social impact assessment in order to reach accurate outcomes to be taken into consideration. Thank you for your patience.
Oh, that's very nice. Thank you. Well, thank you, Lilian. I think maybe you should leave the final slide because somehow it seems to be an agenda for the next two speakers, whether they're able to deal with this. But before doing this, just some space for questions. If you have anything on this presentation which somehow shows, I would say, the dilemma, really the dilemma, that you want to be very sophisticated and very nuanced in how you approach. And on the other hand, you simply notice that within Greek culture at least, there seems to be room to maneuver, but a very different attitude towards these surveillance technologies as how they are presented. I find that intriguing because if I look at the PRISMS result, Greece also stands out as a very privacy-prone country. It simply shows that in very many vignettes which we had in the PRISMS, Greece shows to be relatively keen on privacy issues, but your presentation clearly shows that they are willing to accept quite some issues in the interest of what is presented as safety and security. Any comments on this? Any issues you would like to raise in terms of decision making, involvement of public, or the issue in Greece as it is? It's your final chance to be involved. Nothing? Okay, that's nice. Then you must have been perfectly clear, which is, I would say, very nice for being a lawyer. And so now we will continue with David Barnard. And he will take with us. He will take us with him into the realms and the let's say the dark spaces of the PRISMS DSS.
Kind of details. So thanks for sticking around. Good afternoon. Were most of you in the panel session before this? So people kind of heard a little bit about the PRISMS project. I won't go into it into much detail. But one of the commitments of the project was to develop a decision support system. So I'll talk a little bit more about what those are in a few moments. But a decision support system which would support security decision makers in implementing security measures in a way that did not automatically trade off privacy, right? That did not sort of systematically discount privacy concerns, but in a way that took them into account and brought them into that decision-making process. So I'll kind of talk in sort of three parts. Firstly, I'll talk a little bit about what DSS are and why they might be applicable in security decision-making. Then I'll talk about the PRISMS approach, and if we have some time, some reflections on this as a form of research, as a research methodology in itself. So yeah, first of all, the decision support systems in general. Basically, they're a tool to guide decision makers, a tool or a technology, even if a paper-based kind of method, to guide decision makers through a complex decision. They're generally not used for simple decisions because they're generally sort of, that would be overweight and unnecessary, but they're used for kind of thinking through complex problems in structured ways, and often complex problems where all the information necessary to make a decision has not yet been acquired. They offer a number of benefits to the decision maker and kind of for us as sort of interventionist researchers. One is the ability to correct or counter kind of systematic errors that crop up with some regularity in decision-making processes. So, you know, biases or distortions that tend to kind of happen in a way a decision, you know, happens with some regularity. So DSSs are often used to align an individual's decision-making process with, say, like an institutional way of doing things, or perhaps even with legal compliance, although there's issues there. The other advantages which might be relevant for us are the ability to bring in different and diverse sources of information in a structured way so they can influence the decisions being made, and as well as documenting, as a way of documenting that process. So at the end of the decision-making process, you have some kind of potentially some transparency. So why would then that be useful for security? Now, our working assumption was there is some constitutive kind of lack or problem with the way that security decisions are often made. And when I'm talking about security decisions, for our case, this isn't, you know, the be-all and end-all, but for our case, we're thinking about a situation where a decision maker has some kind of security problem they're responsible for, and they have to, or they feel the need to introduce some kind of measure in response to that problem, and we want to try and make them have a better measure, but a measure that kind of works, meets their kind of needs, but at the same time takes privacy and surveillance issues into account. So these are, not all these problems will apply to every security decision, but there are things that crop up, and we see them from the kind of security studies literature, critical security, surveillance studies, all these kind of literatures identify fairly regular problems in security decision making. And they're not like making security decision makers out to necessarily be bad guys, but they are kind of sort of problems that they face. So, for example, we may have a general cultural privileging of security over privacy, although we, like the PRISMS results suggest that that's not something the public shares. The institution making the decision may have authority and responsibility for the security, but not any for privacy. So it's just not in their decision-making kind of sort of space. People tend to focus on the shiny and new and nice new technologies that offer, kind of the potential to solve problems, and people might get kind of caught up on those, even when they might not be the most appropriate technology to use in a situation. Also, security vendors, right, people making security technologies, push them onto decision makers, right? They market them, and they kind of, find markets, and they identify places where they, could move a product they already have into a different industry. Also, things like path dependency. This is the way we've done this. This is the way we've dealt with this security problem in the past. So we should carry on doing it this way, even if it's kind of privacy invasive. So I won't go through the whole list, but there are these fairly regular problems that crop up, and we might be able to correct some of those by using the features of a decision support system to kind of like reintroduce or correct some of those kind of problems. So the ambition would be to move from a decision which is how do I maximize security to how do we implement appropriate security measures that are legitimate, proportional, and so on, and respond to a threat or a security problem, whilst minimizing the impact on privacy of individuals and groups, without ending up in the kind of position in the middle, which is we make something which allows people to legitimize security technologies in a sort of just in appearance alone, right? So we don't want to kind of provide a marketing tool. There are some problems with this approach, right? I mean, it might be that we are essentially doing some form of problem-solving theory in which we accept the status quo, that there are security threats, and that's not an innocent politics, right? It's not an innocent politics to just accept the security threat as defined by a security decision maker. I won't get into that, but I would happily discuss it later. This process could be manipulated, it could be gamed, so we have to assume at least a certain measure of good faith on the part of the person making the decision. We can't correct for that or counter that. So if that's not the case, then if somebody wants to abuse this process, then they will. And there's lots of other privacy problems that this will not solve. So, it's not a be all and end all. So what's our approach, right? So that's decision support systems in sort of general. Our approach ended up being essentially a kind of hybrid. Marc came up with this concept, and I really liked it. So it's basically, it's kind of a hybrid of a privacy impact assessment, which has some pedigree and some use, and elements from participatory technology assessment. So it takes the decision maker through a step-by-step process, looking at lots of different privacy dimensions, getting them to kind of evaluate them, and then presenting those sort of findings back at the decision maker in some structured forms. It's attempts to build in the various findings we've kind of got from the PRISMS project, both in terms of kind of the research findings, but also the literature reviews, the kind of the, what are the relevant laws, what are the relevant kind of policy, things like that, where possible. Ours isn't automated, right? You're not going to put information into this, and it's not going to spit out a pick this option or pick this option. It's a process you work through yourself with perhaps a team of people, but human minds are involved. RDSS is currently like a set of paper templates, right? You literally kind of work through this as a sort of a workbook or something, and by the end of it, you'll have a report on the privacy relevant dimensions of a set of security measures. This is the whole thing. This is the flow chart for the whole thing. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk you through that, but it'll be in the eventual reports and publications. Briefly, basically, it has a kind of preparatory phase which pulls together lots of information, lots of sort of sources of different insight. So, for example, you might talk to the public, however you define that. There's an assessment phase that runs through different security measures through a set of questions designed to tease out the salient differences between them, right? So lots of different types of privacy questions, so you can make meaningful distinctions between different security measures. Then there's a mitigation phase where you try and say, okay, well, these are the measures we've looked at. These are the ones that seem effective or useful. They still have privacy problems. Are there extra steps, extra sort of changes to those measures we can take, which will minimize some of those things. So say, for example, we're dealing with security in an airport, and we've assessed body scanners and additional staff and CCTV as our three kind of measures. We might say, well, yes, then we have CCTV is okay, but we don't want to record it, we want to just monitor it, or the body scanner is really bad on privacy of various sorts, but if we make sure that the operator is in a different room, or kind of, the figure of the body is anonymized, then that doesn't remove those problems, but it mitigates some of the potential harm. So we basically use a number of I've called these methods here, but they're basically the kind of the design tricks, or the kind of the methods that the decision support tries to use. It tries to basically put privacy and security on a procedurally equal footing. So it's not you do a security assessment and then you go, oh, we've got to think about the privacy issues in this. It puts them in parallel in the same process. So you have to, if you're following this properly, meaningfully, you consider them both. It attempts to challenge that problem definition, so it doesn't just assume that the decision maker has a correct account of what the security threat is. So again, it tries to bring in external perspectives. Not quite as much as the sort of surprise method does, but it tries to, from what I understand of it. It uses reflexive questioning, so it sometimes appears to look like you're being asked to give scores to things, but that we know you can't actually give scores to those things. It's basically a method to get you to sort of think about the question. It kind of mandates the inclusion of genuine alternatives. So there's a stage early on where you, and this is something that I think is very important based on the PRISMS survey findings. It genuinely makes you include a couple of other, perhaps less surveillant, less privacy impactful measures in the assessment. So if they come out as meeting the security goals, but also have less privacy impact, then that's a good, reason to select that measure. As I said, we try to mitigate try to provide guidance on how to mitigate as many of the sources of privacy harm as we can. And we include social impacts of data processing and things, as well as individual privacy harms. So we don't just assume that privacy is an individual value. So if I kind of conclude by leaving some of the three, there are more issues, but these are the three kind of open issues as in using decision support as part of a research project. It's a design activity, which is interesting because you can change it and set it up in different ways, and you just have to sort of test it and see how it works. So to a certain extent, it requires a slightly different set of skills to some of the other kind of research you might be doing, but it's interesting. We often find ourselves kind of making some working assumptions about how to turn research findings into this kind of sort of structured process. And were the research findings best used to inform like the questions you asked, or the way you asked the questions? So there were content and form issues there, which were quite interesting. One question that's worth discussing is how transparent should a decision support system be, right? How honest to the user should you be about your intentions, right? So should we design a system that which nudged or guided security decision makers? I mean, we're already doing that, right? Because it's normative. We've made some assumptions about what a good security decision looks like. But how many of those can we make, and how honest should we be? But we're at the start of this thing, we're very upfront. We are trying to encourage you to think about privacy issues. But you might anticipate other nudges or biases in a tool like this. And finally, it kind of raises issues of procedural, from a political point of view, it raises issues of procedural justice and outcomes. If a security measure has gone through this process, right, and the measure that was picked was the least impactful on a bunch of important privacy dimensions, is that then okay? And does that have implications for enforcement by DPAs or certification or any of these other things? Or should we just, try and get people to do this process or processes like this, and then hope the outcomes are better? Or should we be looking at both? So that's kind of me. That's the PRISMS DSS. Happy to talk about it more. Or
thank you. Okay. Well, give him an applause. Nice presentation, wasn't it? Okay. And any questions you would like to raise now immediately? None at all? No critical reflections? Any may I ask a question? Does any of you have some kind of experience with citizen participation, citizen participative processes? Yeah. What do you think? What would you say of this approach? Your first thoughts.
I think it's reasonable. Often people, when asked questions where judgment is needed, humans are unable to give a score on a scale unless visually assisted. And I wasn't there when you asked them the question and what was mediating the interaction. But I found in our work that we need to sort of have some metaphors that they're happy with in terms of scaling when they give qualitative Likert scale type of answers. So that's my, and especially when it's trade-offs, if they're going to be asked to do a trade-off judgment.
Thanks. So that's a very nice methodological aspect. May I ask Lilian, just briefly, if you look at this presentation, would you say that might be helpful in a Greek context?
Yes.
Please use the mic.
Yeah. Yes, under the condition that we should have a kind of private consultation with the respondents to understand their background and their, but I'm not very sure if it will work as it is.
Okay, and then David, this question about audience. Who is the audience for this decision support system?
Okay, so in this particular case, it's designed for somebody making a security decision, right? That there are lots of types of security decision. It's probably a private sector thing, although it could be an institution, somebody with an institutional responsibility for security. We haven't designed this for national security. Like it's a different thing.
So police organizations,
okay, yeah, police or somebody, say
public
authority, business premises manager, someone with responsibility for a shopping centre or transport or something.
And then one final question. Okay, Chris. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. A great presentation. You brought up the issue of security as value laden, and how do you talk to decision makers about that? Is there a way to build it into the decision-making process? I work with a lot of law enforcement, and they don't see their jobs as value-laden. They say, we're law enforcers. We enforce the law. Yeah. And there's no policy. And they'll look at you and tell you that with a straight face. So how do you do that?
That's a fun question. So to a certain extent, with this piece of work, it has to be very much in the sense of, there's a justificatory piece in the front of the decision report, which sort of says why, a very short kind of piece, but it says why is privacy important, right? And it's sort of not to sort of say, you're bad guys for discounting it, or you're not doing something moral. But here's a thing that may slip your thinking. So it's.
Yeah. Okay. Wait a minute.
A local authority would look at alternatives to surveillance, where there might be a soft underbelly of, kind of crime kind of situation, where a street might be poorly lit. They might say, well, we are getting a lot of cars broken into in here. Shall we put a CCTV camera? Shall we have a bobby going through there every 5 minutes, or just simply make sure all this lighting is sorted? So, and the police, their bottom line is to deliver to the local authority crime reduction targets, as reported. So that to me is value by proxy, or value.
Yeah, yes. That's what I would like. Chris, is this? Would you agree, or would you say?
Allocation decisions are value laden. Decisions about what you're going to tolerate at protests are value laden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you agree? You say there's some kind of a hidden value, but usually the hidden values are really policy oriented and very descriptive in some sense, and they don't take. That's downstream.
Sometimes they're not acknowledged.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. This was kind of my point. Is that to a certain extent, the threat or risk with decision support things is they take the sort of the situation in the world as is when how it is conventionally defined, right? So the security decision maker starting to use this process says, well, here's my security problem, and it's an objective security problem, right? Things get stolen from my shop, or and to so that's seems to be how people often tend to think about their kind of security decisions, whereas, politically I tend to think that security is a thing about perceptions, and it's about kind of the framing of issues, and what gets counted as a security issue and what gets counted as an economic issue or a health issue, or there's fuzzy and flexible boundaries which are context specific. So the decision support method, we hope, works in both kind of cases. So it works if you assume a sort of an objectivist ontology of security problems, or if you have a constructivist account which sort of says security problems emerge out of a particular context. Because in both contexts, it's sort of, so for the objectivist.
Okay, well, let's be brief, because there are many more things we need to cover. I think you introduce a number of additional interesting issues, but and I think the others probably will interact as well, or would be very happy to interact. But I still do propose that you will continue with your with the presentation. By the way, let me introduce you, Daniel Trottier, now working in the Erasmus University, but you used to be part of the Wellington University. Am I? The? Yeah, Westminster. That's what I meant. Yeah, right. And so you're going to introduce some parts of the PACT decision approach. Okay, feel free.
All right, thank you. So this afternoon, I'm going to focus on the involvement of citizens in decision support for privacy and security issues, and also consider what lessons we can learn from this inclusion. So in these 10 or so minutes, I'm going to begin by briefly presenting the PACT decision support system, focusing mainly on user requirements. After this, I'm going to consider some of the risks involved in other instances of citizen involvement. And here I'm going to draw from some of the other results of the PACT project. And then I'm going to conclude by pointing to other developments in citizen-led security and policing. This is going to get a bit speculative and a bit dystopian, but why not? Next slide. Okay, yeah. The PACT project, I think much like a lot of entities in this room, serves to interrogate the so-called privacy-security trade-off that we keep hearing about. And it does this by looking at the factors that affect public assessment of security and privacy implications of any given security technology. The PACT DSS, in turn, aims at assessing the decision process of experts through the implementation of PACT's theoretical and empirical findings. If we take a look at the PACT DSS, we'll see that it's rather context-specific in that it's based on some context from some of the earlier empirical work, such as our survey, so focusing primarily on travel, healthcare, and the internet. Yet the PACT DSS is also modular and extensible such that it can integrate future empirical studies. So if we look a bit more closely at the user requirements, this we came up with based on feedback from PACT expert groups. So this includes our stakeholder advisory group, our privacy advocates panel, as well as our high-level policy panel. So the feedback was collected through questionnaires as well as roundtable discussions during dedicated presentation and workshop sessions. So there's three main takeaways in terms of user requirements based on these interactions. The main affordance of the PACT DSS is to be both context sensitive as well as flexible. So in other words, utilizing data from multiple sources as well as taking into account the legal and ethical as well as social implications of these given scenarios. Next, the PACT DSS ideally should be relatively easy to use and intuitive to the user. So this would be manifest in terms of good HMI, human-machine interaction design, as well as the easing of technical language in the interface. So if we take these two first points together, we see a coupling of both sort of a robustness in terms of its social context, as well as a streamlining of the technical specifications, at least on the user end. Finally, the PACT DSS ideally should allow a high level of customization as well as the ability to provide feedback to the system at any given point of the interaction. Finally, should also be rather forgiving of user errors. I don't think any of this would come as a surprise to any of you. Now, if we take a close look at the user layer, and I load up all 5 points at once, it's not a 5-course dinner, we might as well get these all out. We see that it utilizes a thin client approach, such that the user can access the application through a web browser without the need of deploying any specific client application on their own computer. This comes with several advantages. As you can see, convenience and accessibility are at the forefront. It's not bound to any sort of physical computer or device. Likewise, there's very little maintenance effort, no installation efforts. It's deployed and maintained on the server side. In terms of interoperability, it in principle can work with any hardware that's equipped with an operating system and a web browser. It's reasonably cost effective, so these web-based applications tend to be a bit cheaper than desktop applications. And again, you don't have the cost of individual maintenance fees. And finally, in terms of user training, this can be done remotely. It can be done at the user's convenience and pace. And taken together, these have quite a few advantages in terms of the deployment of the DSS, as well as the integration of additional data, as well as user perceptions. Now, an important caveat at this point is that this perhaps raises the opportunity of inclusion of user perceptions or citizen perceptions from social media and other potentially crowdsourced applications. So once we start to look at the functional specifications, it's important to reflect on the potential use of social media data here and how this obviously raises a lot of social, ethical, and data protection challenges. So in considering these challenges in greater depth, I want to focus on the crowdsourcing of surveillance and security decisions, and specifically the crowdsourcing of CCTV footage surveillance. So this is based on some earlier work that we did in the PACT project, our social impact report, where we would assess the impact of new technologies and be especially attentive to emerging trends. One of these was examples where CCTV footage and stills were being crowdsourced over the internet. Our research considered 4 UK-based case studies, but in many of these cases, the footage itself could cross national borders. So I want to focus specifically on Internet Eyes. I believe there's another slide. Thank you. So Internet Eyes is a now defunct business that acted as a sort of intermediary between small businesses that would have CCTV cameras but no one to look at them, and personnel who would have the time and the willingness to go through this footage and flag anything of note. So shop owners would sign up, and then they would be presented with a crowd of individuals who would watch over their camera footage. Users, as you can see in the corner here, would be presented with 4 streams at once. These would be randomized and anonymized such that they wouldn't know which shop or where this was taking place. And every once in a while, they would be presented with a new set of 4 streams. So this cost businesses £75 a month. For legal reasons, the users themselves also paid into this scheme, £2 a month. And anybody from either EU or EEA countries, as well as countries with a data sharing agreement with the EU, could join in. So Canada, Argentina, apparently. In terms of the financial reasons people might join into these schemes, there was a point system such that if someone were to successfully detect shoplifting or any other crime, they would click on the report button. If that report turned out to be legitimate, they would get some points. If not, they would be deducted points. So there's a bit of a gamification going on. At the end of every month, the person with the most points would get £1,000. Fantastic. And everybody else would be paid on a sort of very meager hourly wage for their efforts. So in looking at this scheme, basically every social and ethical concern linked to camera surveillance is heightened when this work is crowdsourced, of course. Internet Eyes has drawn criticism from the UK Information Commissioner's Office, as well as civil liberties groups. partly because this footage was crossing national borders, and in some cases, footage leaked onto YouTube. To this, we can also consider the professionalism of these camera operators. So Internet Eyes had a public Facebook group where, among other things, these crowdsourced camera watchers would come on and make snide comments about people's appearance and behavior. We can also consider some of these risks a bit further. So I want to ask you, what would you do if you were a crowdsourced camera operator watching these 4 streams and you, instead of seeing a shoplifting incident, saw something much more violent, like a violent assault on a shop owner? What would you do in that case? Yes, they are.
What is the choice? Can you report? Can you phone? Can you mail? Can you?
When you report, it then goes to the Internet Eye server, and then eventually to the shopkeeper, who is well aware of the situation. You can't call if you call up your local police and say,
Beaten up again.
yeah. So, and the thing is, because these are randomized, you don't know where this criminal act is taking place. You couldn't even specify the county or the country. So you're left having witnessed this very real-time traumatic event with absolutely no recourse, no debriefing, nothing. So we also have to consider the emotional toll of these camera workers, much like scholars such as Clive Norris and Gavin Smith have done with conventional CCTV. Of course, we can also consider the political economy of crowdsourced surveillance, such that there is an interesting monetization going on here. Canadian media scholar Alison Hearn summarizes this quite nicely as workers without jobs. I just want to conclude by saying that the absence of systems and citizen participation is not a solution either, because citizens are getting involved in this themselves. So some of the work that I've been focusing on most recently is digital vigilantism. So these are user-led, or in other words, spontaneous forms of surveillance and security decisions. These are processes where citizens are collectively offended by other citizen activity and then respond through coordinated retaliation on social media platforms and mobile devices. This includes, but is not limited to, a kind of naming and shaming where I think visibility is weaponized. So people's personal information, their medical records, their addresses, their workplace, their family, any information that can be dug up is then broadcast on public platforms. I spoke about this at this conference 2 years ago in the context of the Vancouver riots. I believe it was actually at not the same space, but the same time slot. But we see there's a lot of other incidents, such as the response on social news platform Reddit after the Boston Marathon bombings. There's been a lot of cases surrounding very minor incidents such as bad parking, people taking up too much space on subways and buses, but also incidents such as tracking down child exploitation. So UK-based groups such as Let's Go Hunting and Pedophiles Unmasked are also in the mix. And of course, there's a very complex moral dimension here where it makes sense that people want to mobilize in response to terrorism, in response to child exploitation, and in response to bad parking, but how that happens remains to be addressed. So I'll just conclude by saying that based on these disparate and admittedly rather dystopian developments, we see that in mobilizing users for security decisions, we also have to mobilize resources, specifically in terms of the professionalism of these users. But on the flip side, we can't not mobilize them either, as they're already involved. Thank you.
I take this mic because you will have one for yourself. When I got it proper, Daniel, then basically what you said is you introduced the decision support system, and you introduced basically 2 business cases which might be interesting for such a decision support system. But you didn't use the decision support system in these cases, did you?
No, we didn't have the opportunity to do that.
Okay. And did you have an opportunity to use the DSS in a specific use case?
I believe it was used in the context of, like I mentioned, healthcare, travel, and internet use.
With real audiences?
Yes, and this is an ongoing development, so I'm not in a position to report those findings.
Okay. Any issues you would like to bring forward on this presentation on how a decision support system should look like? Would you be in favor of such a system? Would you like it? Would you endorse the use of such a system? Any comments? I can come up to you and then ask you simply just like that. Any comments? Who would say this looks like a very favorable development? This is what we should have. Any supporters? Who would say not at all? Not over my dead body. Okay, I think this man in front of me is really waiting to add to the discussion. Would you?
Not yet.
Not yet? No. Okay, then this lady.
I'm wondering how representative that involvement is.
The involvement of the citizens, you mean?
In that particular application, because basically anyone can join that, but how representative of that targeted that challenge that was discussed in the very first presentation by Lilian, when she was asking who is the targeted audience, and how it's possible with that application that you just discussed. It's a question to Daniel. How it's possible to find that targeted audience.
Thank you. You understand? So what's the targeted audience if you look at your business cases for using your DSS?
In terms of our DSS, our targeted audience, I think, runs rather parallel to the targeted audience that David was describing. In taking a look at the first business model, especially Internet Eyes, if you take a look at especially the Facebook group, the people who were sort of the vocal representatives, it seems that it was a lot of former security experts, I suspect some retired police officers, a bit interpretive, probably people who sort of had failed attempts at landing a career in law enforcement, who, that was sort of their motivation. If you take a look at some of these digital vigilantism groups, there tends to be a very significant us-them dynamic. A lot of nationalism flares up, or a lot of identifying some sort of culprit. So I think in terms of political representation or demographics, you see parallels between participation in these groups and participation in other sort of populist movements.
Yeah. Is that a kind of a question, an answer? Sort of? Okay, more to discuss, but we will continue with, let's say, a real exercise in doing such a decision support system by Jacob. We started a bit late, which was a bit unfortunate because this is the very final workshop. We will have the very final panel, but it also gives the opportunity to maybe get a bit of additional time. But see, Jacob, whether you can make it within the 15 minutes.
I can try, and I will not talk about infrastructure and data architecture or PHP programming. I will do something else. I will show you the program that we developed in Surprise and used in our citizen consultations, and I will expose you all to it. But before doing so, before actually answering or asking some of the same questions that we asked the citizens, where you can answer and we will rate it together. Now you're a group of experts, but you cannot be experts in all areas at once. And this is kind of the point with the DSS involving many different users, age groups, genders, all this in one session. That is to have an informed dialogue where decisions are probably not made, because it's not decision makers who are using decision support tool, but it's a group of citizens that can in turn probably inform the decision makers on the rationale, the reasons behind why they had these different ratings. But before doing so, I do have a short presentation on our system, because otherwise it may be a bit hard to exactly know what we were doing. I'm going to do this very quickly, so it will probably be more like a slideshow than a formal presentation, but I'm available for any questions you may have afterwards. We engage citizens in order to get answers to our 5 technologies. We gain insights into the way they are thinking. It should be controversial, like David also mentioned, because we don't deal with any matter, and we want to inform policymakers. What you need is a problem, a location, a lot of people. These are ordinary people, and to answer, or at least try to answer the questions that were raised earlier, we actually do a lot of effort to get a group of, well, ordinary people composed of young, elderly, of course a gender balance, but also a difference in opinions. And I could talk about this for a very long time. We have different methods, different approaches to do this, but we have done so in many occasions. It requires half a day at least, a questionnaire, some tables, a table moderator, and a balanced information material. And this is of course not easy to achieve. I mean, to make a balanced information material requires a lot of effort. What we propose is that this could be kind of a shared thing. So if we're going to do this a lot in the future, and we hope so in the Surprise project, maybe we could share these kinds of balanced information sheets that is available for discussions, and that would be a way of integrating these processes into a policy process. Like Johann mentioned in the beginning, this is not something that is instead of democracy as such. This is a supplement, and this is a way of not only voting yes or no to very complex questions, but actually having a debate. What we did in the large-scale event was to use these voting clickers. We had 200 people in a room, and you get results like this, and that's your Likert scale. So people can answer in a range. What we did. This is just to say that the thing I showed you in the beginning, that's a computer program. It's nothing in itself. What made this computer program and what made the process, the procedure interesting, is all the academic research in the beginning and our model. That's the large-scale summits where in total almost 2,000 people throughout Europe were gathered and using these clickers to answer a lot of questions. And then there was the small-scale events where we asked in-depth questions and recorded the dialogue using the decision support system. As you can see here, it's part of an engine. So that's basically our understanding. It's a very huge process of participatory methods, and then there is a computer program supporting that. We also involved experts in this because our involvement was strictly citizens. We have done this with experts as well, but that's another story. And then in the end, we come out with some results and some recommendations. I'm not going through this. You can read it. There are some differences. Main idea, to make it cost efficient, to see can we actually downscale this the citizen summit into something that a business can say, okay, we can do this. It takes half a day, not too much effort. And I think in conclusion, very brief, we found that it was indeed possible to do, and the results were comparable. We tested these three in the large scale, and these two also in the small scale. These countries were involved. The orange ones did both the large scale and the small scale. The yellow ones only the large scale. So now turning to the DSS and our interactive session. If you're up for it, and I'm sure you are, it's Friday. It's probably not nice weather outside, so now we are in a room. Maybe you met the ones that are sitting around you, but if you didn't, take this moment while I start the system to just introduce yourself briefly, and we'll run through a few questions on selected technologies, and I will look forward to your assessment on these matters, and I can show you a little on the system. Okay, so please turn around or say hello to the one next to you. Okay, it's great to hear you talking. I hope it's relevant for the discussion. There are two parts of the DSS. Oh, you start. What are you talking about? Okay, there are two parts to this decision support system. The first, we did a focus group style interview meeting, you could say, where we developed a questionnaire. All these questions could be, replaced with something that would be relevant to any other case, but leave that. This is about DPI. Sorry. The first session is actually open. We are discussing all kinds of security technologies at once. This is, of course, that implies some difficulties, but anyway, you can say this system, one table facilitator is sitting with a computer in front of them and basically reading from the screen what to do, what to say to the citizens, and they will have a discussion. So the first discussion that I will ask you to have, and we don't have a pen and paper and the voting block, so you'll do without, but that is, how would you formulate in 1 or 2 words or in a sentence what privacy means to you? And you're not going to write it down, so just turn around again and say just one sentence or a single word. What is privacy to you? Okay? No, just okay, since this is a 3-day conference on privacy, you won't get long time. Okay, privacy. What is privacy to you? Would you care to?
Yeah, for me, maybe privacy is a free space, just to, without any intervention, just to make any action from my inside. So it's a kind of autonomy. Yeah.
And you, sir?
Privacy. No,
that's privacy. Okay. Privacy.
Well, 2 things: the opportunity, the right to develop myself, my personality, and the right to be let alone.
Okay, we are of course not going into detail. This is for the citizen consultation to go into detail, but we get from this quite substantial knowledge on how citizens position themselves, how they regard privacy, and this turned out to be extremely interesting results, and of course important to know what they think about when we are discussing privacy. And it's also interesting to know what you experts at a privacy conference think about privacy. For the next question, it's a voting question. So you can see we kind of throughout the process have different approaches. So it's kind of a very dynamic session. The question is, how much concerned are you, if at all, that the use of surveillance-oriented security technologies are eroding privacy? I'm very concerned. I'm concerned. I'm not really concerned. I'm not at all concerned. We asked this question in the previous session, but if you just indicate, you just take the I'm very concerned. Who among you are very concerned? Okay, that's about half. And I'm concerned. And is there not at all concerned in the room? No. Okay. But of course, these are just numbers, and numbers are great because it makes your analytical work afterwards easier. But what is more interesting is, that's the question I'm going to ask you in the groups. What are the reasons for this? Could you please state if one in the group, was not the case, but if one in the group wasn't concerned at all. Why? This is interesting. Also for the others to know why would one think that this is of no concern at all. But try briefly in the group to ask for reasons for this. Why are you afraid, concerned that it's eroding privacy? Maybe it's a given, but yeah. It's a lovely time slot to have between you and the end of the conference. So, would you like to share your...
Sure. I guess I am concerned because if I don't know who knows what about me, then I don't know what their reaction or the decision-making process of decisions that might affect me are based on.
Okay. Other points that someone would like to make? Otherwise, I'll just briefly show you the second part of the system, which is a more traditional deliberative method where we ask open-ended questions. So, for instance, on the trade-off, this was, as you know, a major part of our projects. It is often said that privacy and security are incompatible. That one can be increased only at the expense of the other. Do you agree? Do you share this opinion? Please share your thoughts in the groups. And you can see then we would record the open discussion, and they would then make a recommendation if they found common ground. If they don't find common ground, that will be recorded in the system as well. But then we make a recommendation, what to do about this, and then we rate this. Then you can see in the end, you get some kind of, a recommendation result, and you get it, give it a title. But share, please, in the group very briefly, if you share the opinion that one thing can only be increased at the expense of the other. You like to introduce yourself better than this?
Is inevitable.
You don't believe in a trade-off?
No, I don't believe that it is inevitably the case that you will have a trade-off. Depends on your engineering of the system of systems that delivers it. Full stop.
Okay. Sir? Huh? You want to comment?
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think from my point of view, it depends how you define security. If you define security as national security, maybe right. Yeah, but in my understanding, you know, security and privacy are helping each other. They are some symbiotic somehow. You know, for example, if you have encryption, this is a security method. Yeah, it helps actually privacy. Yeah.
This is interesting because that's well, in other words, but that's pretty much what the citizen said as well. Yeah.
Okay, I think you will conclude, finally wrap up? Or
no,
something?
please.
Okay, well, and then I'll hand over to Johann. Well, thanks very much for your introduction to this decision support system. Kind of, let's say, if you want to buy the system, please feel free and contact him. Thanks very much.
It's
for your
open source,
presentation.
Creative
It's open
Commons,
source
and
yeah,
downloadable.
Right. So it's for all of us. Okay. Well, thanks. And I think what we try to do just basically is starting with a kind of a theme, a challenge, and then moving forward to how you can really concretize this. It's clear it's not a full-fledged package which we can hand over off the shelf, but we are making progress. There's a lot of discussion which we still need to follow on, and maybe next year another panel, CPDP, maybe not the final one. But I myself am very happy that you all stayed until the very end. And before concluding, I will simply hand over to Johann.
Okay, now we are really in a trade-off situation, continuing here or seeing more of the decision support systems or going to the concluding remarks. But anyway, so thank you for the presentations. I think even if it was not sufficient to go into much details for many of the things that were presented, but I think we did, you got an impression what can be done, and so let's say thank you to the panelists and thank you to the audience, and I'm closing this session. Thank you. Bye-bye.